Hey, it's Dr. John Terry, the Black Belt Leader, and welcome to the Black Belt Leadership Podcast, where each week I'm giving you tips, tools, insights, and resources to help you become a better version of who you are and what you do as you discover, develop, and deploy your own Black Belt leader within. Hey, I want to talk about chains and the topic of being no longer bound. But I'm curious, if you had to make a guess, how far back in history do you think we saw the first use of chains documented? Well, the answer to that question may surprise you because the use of chains dates back to at least the Old Kingdom of Egypt. Now, that's around 2600 BC. The ancient Egyptians and later the ancient Babylonians utilized chains for decorative purposes, and we see that evidenced by examples of jewelry that they found in royal tombs. Now, these chains, which were small links typically made of some precious metal like gold or silver, they played a role not only in just adornment, but in religious rituals as well. In many beliefs, they offered protection to the priest and the worshipers, or in some other cultures, the chains themselves served to link the wearer to the gods. Now, again, as we look back through history, we see these ornamental chains, typically made of bronze, silver, gold, or some other precious metal. And these handcrafted pieces of jewelry not only adorned the bodies of pharaohs and kings and queens, but we also see that priests, royal officials, and other individuals of high status or extreme wealth wore these types of chains, these necklaces and belts and other pieces of jewelry to show off their status and their symbols of authority. Now, interestingly enough, we often think of chains as a means to secure something, or we think of it in terms of prisons or penal colonies or controlling criminals in some way. And interestingly enough, chains were used in the form of shackles to restrain prisoners who were working in the mines or being housed in the prisons. And they also served to control the movements of prisoners as they were being transported to and fro from place to place, again, in the old kingdom of Egypt. And we also see that in Babylonia and other ancient cultures. Now, fast forward a few centuries, with the advent of iron, we see chains begin to take on even more utilitarian roles. The Romans, as an example, they used chains primarily for pulling or for lifting, as well as being part of the ancient pieces of equipment that they would build for, as an example, collecting water. Now, again, made from iron links, these chains were very instrumental in construction and in shipbuilding for moving, for hoisting, and securing large objects or group of large objects, restraining their movement. Now, as early as the 3rd century BC, we saw the use of chain in a different perspective in the form of chainmail or of body armor, as we would think of it today. This early appeared in Carpathia, again, around the 3rd century, and it later spread through Europe, through Asia, through Africa, and throughout the Middle East. Now, by the 18th century AD, we see the use of chainmail as very commonplace in most of the modern militaries of that day. Why? It provided varying levels of protection against sword, knife, spear, and arrow. So think of it as the Kevlar of the early 18th, 16th, 14th, 13th century, even going back into the areas prior to the birth of Christ. Now, the popularity of chainmail was due in part to its relatively light weight as compared to a suit of armor, its ability to be able to allow the wearer to move and have mobility, but also its effectiveness in combat as defensive wear. Now, in the 16th century, we see Leonardo da Vinci, and as we examine his sketches, we see that he sketched early designs for iron chains. And interestingly enough, when you dig into Da Vinci's study of chains, he focused on their structure, their strength, and the potential applications of using chains to perform various functions. One of the things that he demonstrated is that a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. That's where that quote came from, was from the studies of Leonardo da Vinci. And da Vinci himself began to incorporate the use of chains into various mechanical and engineering inventions that he was working on during his life. Now, oftentimes we think of chain, we think of the ball and chain from the prison systems, and the ball of chain as a prison restraint dates back to the 17th century. It was widely used in the British Empire and its colonies up until the mid 20th century. The chain was attached to the prisoner's ankle by a shackle, and the other end of the chain was attached to the ball. Now, interestingly enough, as I was researching chains, here's something neat I found about the ball and chain. The weight of the ball was often determined by the court that would order a ball and chain as part of the punishment. And the weight of that ball could range from around 5 pounds to around 25 pounds, depending on the size and weight of the individual that was to be shackled to the ball and chain. And again, we saw the ball and chain primarily used in prisons and penal colonies. Now, that ball and chain also made its way from Britain into the American prison system, and we saw the American prison system use these chains, these balls and chains, as physical restraints. But ultimately, the ball went away, the chain remained, and what we saw more prevalent in the American prison system up until the 60s, and in some cases even into the early 70s, was what we call today the chain gang. This was where they would chain a group of prisoners together, shackling them one to another in a group, and that would allow those individuals to be restrained from running away while they were sent out to do their work details outside of the prison. Now, we saw the chain prevalent in the 18th and 19th century continue, as I said, well into the 20th century, and in some cases, even up until the early 1970s. But interestingly enough, if we go back in time, we see that since the days of Pharaoh, chains have been used to restrain individuals, to hold them back, to restrict their movements, and to keep them where they were, unable to move forward. Did you get what I said? Those chains were used to restrain an individual, to restrict their movements, and to prevent them from moving forward. Now, chains throughout history have also been used to secure heavy loads and to restrain their movement during transport or while stored. You have only here in the United States to drive down the highway and get behind a log truck to see how they use these heavy chains to secure their logs as they're moving them from the place that they've been cut down in the woods and taking them ultimately to the paper mill where they're going to be processed and turned into paper or other wooden objects. Now, you may be asked the question, John, why the history lesson on chains? Well, it's very simple, and this is where I want to lean into a personal growth and a leadership observation, because remember, insights are available all day, every day, through the things that we interact with and see that we often don't pay attention to. So why the history lesson on chains? Very simple. Once bound by a chain, your movement is limited and your freedom is denied. Now, let me say that again, and I want you to think closely and think deeply into this statement. Why the history lesson on chains? Once bound by a chain, your movement is limited and your freedom is denied. Now, whether you realize it or not, people do this to you every single day, often without your knowledge, but you're giving consent if you're allowing others to control your life. Now, think about it this way. People every day, even the people closest to you, are going to attempt to force you to conform to the version of you that they see. They see you here and now as you are, and if they're part of the 95% of average, mediocre, lackluster people we talk about here often on this podcast, they want to keep you in that moment because it's their goal to protect you from the unknown, and they want to keep you from stepping out and venturing into something that could potentially, in their minds, be dangerous. So remember, people, even those closest to you, will often attempt to force you or constrain you or restrain you to conform to the version of you that they see. Unchecked, this will allow them to chain you to their version of you and limiting your opportunity to learn, to grow, to mature, and to become a better version of yourself. When these individuals chain you to your present circumstance, or they try to chain you to a past version of yourself, they're ultimately restraining you or attempting to restrain you from rising to your full potential. Now, if you don't believe me and you don't believe this happens, ask Kobe Bryant, one of the greatest basketball players that ever played the game. But if you look at his history could have been one that chained him to mediocrity. Remember, Kobe Bryant started as a freshman on his varsity team, and immediately became a national sensation. He broke several records and he ultimately led his team to a state championship in his senior year of high school. He ultimately broke the Southeastern Pennsylvania scoring record set by Wilt Chamberlain himself, and he went on to be named Player of the Year multiple times. Kobe went on to earn the very coveted McDonald's All-American Basketball Player recognition in his senior year. And you know the story if you're a Kobe Bryant fan. After graduating, he opted to forego college and he declared himself eligible for the NBA draft. Now, Kobe was drafted in the 13th overall pick by the Charlotte Hornets in 1996. But interestingly enough, even after they drafted him, the Hornets questioned whether or not Kobe Bryant, as a high school senior going directly into the pros, was going to be able to make that all-important transition from playing at the high school level to playing at the professional level in the NBA. Kobe Bryant, one of the greatest players ever to live, was eventually told he would be of no use to the team, and they never intended to play him. Now, think about that. You just came from being one of the most dynamic players in the country in high school, and you've now been told by a professional basketball team you are of no use to them. Talk about someone trying to restrain you, to restrict you, and to prevent you from moving forward. That's what those statements could have done if Kobe allowed those statements to dictate and define who he was to become. Now, after a little bit of discussion and the fact that the Hornets admitted they weren't going to utilize Kobe Bryant as a player, they ultimately traded Kobe Bryant to the Lakers for Vlade Divac. Now, Jerry West, who was the general manager of the Lakers at the time, he saw Kobe Bryant's potential, and he noted that in his opinion, he believed the Lakers had gotten the very best player in the 1996 draft. And I'm here to tell you, history proved him right. So after joining the LA Lakers, what happened? Kobe went on to enjoy an illustrious 20-year career, leading the Lakers to 5 NBA championships and becoming one of the most recognized faces in the world. Today, even after his untimely demise, he's still considered to be one of the greatest players ever to play the game of basketball. Now, Kobe shared a reason for his trade in a post in Twitter on July 1, 2014. And let me quote that post. On this day, 18 years ago, the Hornets told me right after they drafted me that they had no use for me and they were going to trade me. Hashtag thank you. Hashtag Lakers. Now, why do I share this story? It's because we're talking about chains and how people other than yourself attempt to define who you are and who you can become. So if we look at the story of Kobe Bryant, what do we see? We see a gifted individual who knew his potential, who knew what he wanted, who knew the greatness that awaited him, that refused to be chained by someone else's opinion of him. He refused to be held back. He refused to be pushed into a mold that he was going to be one of those high school stars that never had a chance to see success in the NBA. So what did Kobe do instead? He refused to be bound by the opinion of other people. He chose instead to redefine his ideal life based upon his vision of who he was and, more importantly, who he knew he could become. I love the fact that Kobe ignored the naysayers. And more importantly, he did what was necessary to rise to his full potential, ultimately to prove them wrong. And in doing so, stepped into his greatness. Now, that to me is an amazing story of someone no longer bound. But Kobe Bryant wasn't alone in that opportunity to redefine himself when others tried to define him as less than what his potential could be. Let's take a walk back through history and let's look at some other famous people, highly successful, that individuals tried to pigeonhole them into a lesser version of themselves. These individuals tried to restrain, to restrict, to chain them to a current version of themselves because they refused to see the potential lurking within each and every one of these people. First off, I want to talk about Walt Disney. Now, Walt Disney, who created the Disney Empire, one of the most creative geniuses of all time, you may not know that he was fired from his first job as a newspaper artist because, get this, he was told by the editor he lacked creativity. Now, shift to Albert Einstein, one of the most brilliant men that has ever lived, and one of the instrumental people that helped craft and create the atomic bomb, but also brought us the law of relativity. Albert Einstein was told by a teacher that he was mentally slow. And this teacher told his mother that Albert Einstein would never amount to anything. Now, Thomas Edison attended school for only a few months, and the teacher told Thomas Edison's mother, "This child is confused. He can't think clearly, and he's going to struggle his entire life." So after a few months of education in the school system, Edison's mother removed him and taught him herself. Again, he was told that he was a confused child, unable to think clearly, but he went on to become one of the most prolific creators in modern history. Now, Henry Ford is known for the Ford Empire and his ability to craft a multi-cylinder engine in a single block. And Henry Ford, for all of his successes, many people don't know that his first two auto companies failed, and he was told again and again by people looking at his efforts, what you're trying to do is never going to be successful. Michael Jordan was cut from his high school basketball team, but again went on to become one of the greatest basketball players in NBA history. You may not know that Steven Spielberg was rejected from film school 3 times and was told he didn't have the talent and the skill necessary to be a producer. This one got me. Elvis Presley was fired by the Grand Ole Opry because of a lack of talent, and he was told to go back to driving a truck. Colonel Harlan Sanders, the brain trust behind Kentucky Fried Chicken, was rejected over 1,000 times and was told again and again his franchise model would never work. Over 1,000 times he was told no until someone finally said, "I will partner with you and we will make KFC a household brand." Sir James Dyson failed over 5,000 times before he created the first working Dyson vacuum cleaner. Time and time again, he was told, "Why don't you just give up? It's never going to work." Many of you may not know that Oprah Winfrey was fired from her first job as a television anchor and went on to become a TV icon. Now, out of all the stories I've just shared from these incredibly successful people, and there's many, many more that I could bring, but these were some names I thought that you would know. What's unique about each of these individuals, but is common to every one of them? It was the fact that they refused to be defined by other people's opinions of what they could become. Each and every one of these individuals I mentioned had to break free from the chains of the opinion of other people. They had to free themselves from the limiting beliefs of those who saw them as they were and didn't see that they could become something more. Those individuals, these amazing, incredibly successful men and women, chose instead to redefine the ideal version of themselves because they believed, looking at the image of themselves they had on the inside, that they were able and capable of saying, doing, and becoming more. You know, I love the fact that they refused to be defined by the definitions and the restraints and the limiting beliefs of the people around them. Those people who looked at them only saw them as they were and they focused on their flaws. These individuals chose not to focus on their weaknesses, but they chose instead to focus on their strengths, to focus on their possibilities, to focus on their limitless definition of themselves. These individuals, Ford, Einstein, Oprah Winfrey, Sir Dyson, all the names that I've shared with you, they chose to see themselves not just as they were, but as they could be, and more importantly, as they knew they would become. So these individuals chose to live unchained lives. They chose to free themselves from the limiting opinions of other people. And as they looked within, they saw four things that empowered them to live life on their own terms, to see and hold the image of their limitless self, and to do what was necessary to rise to their full potential. Now, I believe these four things are applicable to you today. So let me share with you the four things that these individuals saw that empowered them to live unchained lives. First, they saw their potential. Now, when you think back of the stories I've shared and the early versions of these individuals, understand other people saw these people that I shared their names as broken, unqualified, or unteachable. Now, rather than accepting that definition of how other people saw them, these men and women, incredibly successful, chose to look within and to see a future version of themselves. And they allowed themselves to see and believe in their untapped capabilities, their abilities, and the possibilities that awaited that other people either didn't recognize or chose not to see. These individuals saw a future version of themselves that was fully equipped, fully empowered, and fully enlightened to rise to the greatness that they knew that was lurking within. Now, not only did they see their limitless future, but they also saw clearly the path they would need to take in order to become that person. For Kobe Bryant, if you ever watched the YouTube interview, he got up early in the morning before the sun rose and he trained for 2 hours. After breakfast, he went back onto the court and he trained for 2 more hours. After lunch, again, another 2 hours of training, and after dinner, 2 more hours before he went to bed. He did that 5 to 6 nights a week. And interestingly, he said, if you do that long enough, after a period of time, other people can't catch up. Kobe Bryant clearly understood his strength, his talent, and the areas where he had the capacity to learn, to grow, and improve, and he did what was necessary to walk the path to become that person. This vision of his future self that these other individuals also shared in common was the catalyst for their personal growth. Every individual saw who they could become and the path to get there, but that path for each and every one of them was as unique and individual as the individual themselves who chose to walk it. And the same is true for you. That vision of the limitless version of yourself can serve as your catalyst for personal growth. But the pathway to get there is going to be unique as you are, but you've got to choose to walk the path and stay on it and do what is required to develop what's necessary to step into the greatness that's waiting and lurking inside of you. Now, the second common thing that these individuals saw is they saw the value in themselves. You know, Einstein, Edison, and the rest of the crew saw and recognized their self-worth early on. They appreciated their inherent value despite a lack of external validation or accomplishments. Remember, they were put down, they were ridiculed, they were mocked, they were told that they would never accomplish anything in the early formative years of their lives. But they refused to accept that as truth. Why? Because of their belief in themselves. And their belief in their potential, the value and worth they saw in themselves, that image of their future selves that they held on to served as the catalyst for change that transformed them over time into the image they held of themselves from the early formative years of their lives. Now, the third thing that they saw was their untapped capabilities lurking within each and every one of them. You know, if you think back to Kobe Bryant's choice not to allow the Hornets' opinion of his potential to limit him, that's what I'm talking about. Kobe recognized and he acknowledged all of the things that he was capable of saying, doing, and becoming. And what did he do? As I just shared, he used that to create a training regimen that honed his skills, his knowledge of the game, and his abilities to perform under stress to a world-class level that very few players rise to that level of success. And because he was aware of his capabilities, what was he able to do? Set realistic and achievable goals that aligned with his strength. He now knew that he could pursue new challenges, he could expand his horizons of what was possible, and he knew what was required to remain in the growth zone. He was willing, because he knew what he was capable of becoming, to push himself to get outside of his comfort zone, because he knew that with a little bit of practice and a little bit of work, he could expand what he was capable of saying, doing, and becoming. And the same thing applies to you. Because when you know your capabilities, your confidence, your belief in yourself gets a huge boost. Now, the fourth and final thing that these individuals all saw in themselves that allowed them to live unchained lives and to redefine the ideal version of themselves is this. I mean, think about Harlan Sanders, think about Henry Ford, the rest of those incredible, successful people throughout history. What was the fourth thing? It was the fact that they saw limitless possibilities all around them. As they continued down the path of personal growth, remember, they saw who they could become and they saw the pathway that they would have to take to get there. And they began to walk that path and they began to stay on that path no matter how long, no matter how steep, no matter how narrow. And because they continued down that path of personal growth, what happened? They daily became, and you're going to recognize this phrase, they daily became a better version of who they were and what they were able and capable of saying, doing, and becoming. Every day, they became a little bit better than the day before. It's that 1% principle that I talk about all the time on this podcast. If you can become 1% better today than yesterday and repeat that again tomorrow, how much better can you be 90 days, 120 days, a year from now if you focus on daily becoming a better version of who you are and what you're capable of saying, doing, and becoming? Now, because of personal growth, they were willing to open their minds to the limitless possibilities around them. And as such, they were able to challenge the status quo. They were able to question what should be and could be, and they could envision innovative ideas that other people either chose not to see or were unable of seeing because the quality of their thinking wouldn't allow them to see it, or they could see it, but they didn't believe that they were capable of achieving or accomplishing or creating that thing. These individuals, because they saw limitless possibilities, simply believed and pursued the fact that they could make the impossible become possible. I mean, think about Thomas Edison and all the incredible inventions that he brought to bear. The incandescent light bulb, the photocopier, the motion picture film industry, the copy machine, the phonograph, all the other things that he developed. And there are myriads of those, probably the most prolific inventor in the 20th century. Those things were capable because he believed to him the impossible was possible. Why did Kobe Bryant, why did Michael Jordan want the ball to take that winning shot with 2 seconds left on the clock? Why did they desire and ask for that? Because they trained, they saw their capabilities, but more importantly, they saw all the possibilities to make that shot that the other players on the floor couldn't see. They saw a way to win when nobody else saw a way to make it happen. And as I already said, if you think of Thomas Edison, he invented a futuristic world of inventions that to the rest of the world at that time were nothing more than mere fantasies or illusions. When other people scoffed and tried to limit his success, Colonel Sanders believed and he saw in his mind's eye a KFC in every town across America offering finger-licking good chicken to families nationwide. And ultimately, because he saw the impossible as being possible, he found a way to make it happen. He chose to be no longer bound, but to live an unchained life. Now, the same is true of Elvis. Elvis Presley saw in his mind's eye the screaming throngs of fans, packing stages around the world, even after the Grand Ole Opry told him he couldn't cut it as a singer. So what about you? You know, Dean Graciosi, a famous personal growth coach and someone I have the opportunity to claim as someone that's been a mentor in my life, Dean famously asked the following question: who's steering your ship? Because whoever is steering your ship, they are in control of your destiny. Now, think about that. The captain of the ship, that person is going to dictate where you go, when you go, how quickly or how slowly you go, and how many stops you're going to make along the way. The captain of your ship is in control of your destiny. If it's someone other than you, are they limiting who you can become? So let me put it this way. If you permit another person's opinions of you to restrain you, to restrict you, to confine you, or to dictate the terms and conditions of your life, guess what? You're not the captain of your ship. So as we get ready to wrap up this week's lesson, I want to ask this question. Who's writing the definition of your life? Is it you or is it someone else? Remember, and I said this in the opening of the podcast, people, even those closest to you, are going to attempt to force you to conform to the version of you that they see. They see you as limited in their eyes because of who you are right now. And if you leave that unchecked and you don't challenge their definition of you, they're going to attempt to chain you to the version of you that they see. And that's going to restrain you from rising to your full potential. Why? Because you've let someone else define who you are and what you're capable of saying, doing, and becoming. So if others are defining your life, if others are restraining you, restricting you, or holding you back, it's time to break the chains. It's time for you to redefine what your ideal life looks like. It's time for you to stop allowing other people to tell you what you can't say, can't do, or can't become. Guess what? They're not you, and they can't see the limitless version of yourself, that image that you are holding in your thoughts, and it's simply waiting for you to accept it, embrace it, and pursue it. Now, why do I say that? Because I believe that every single person, including every single one of you listening to this podcast, were put on this earth on purpose for a purpose. And if you've been put on this earth on purpose for a purpose, it's time for you to go and equip yourself to fulfill that purpose and make the difference that you've been put on this earth to make. What are you waiting on? Are you going to allow other people to define who you are and what you're going to become, or are you going to take the pen and write the limitless definition of your life and start taking the steps necessary to start living it out? And while you're at it, stop seeing yourself as you are and start seeing yourself as you can be, and more importantly, as you will be when you identify the path you need to walk and you make the conscious decision to walk that path and stay on that path until that future version of you is revealed. So I want to challenge you to stop looking at your current limitations, and I want to challenge you to start focusing on what you can and will become as you learn, as you grow, as you improve, and as you daily become a better version of who you are and what you do. I want you to grab that image of that limitless version of yourself, fulfilling the purpose on earth that you've been put here to do. I want you to grab that image and I want you to hold on to it. And I want you to not let go of that image until you see that future version of yourself looking back at you in the mirror when you get up in the morning. So I want you to leave you with this as I get ready to wrap up this episode. And it's a very simple thought, but I think it's important. And I want to make sure that you get it and that you understand it. And that's this. Are you ready? You have the power to change the definition and the trajectory of your life. Let me say that again. You have the power to change the definition and the trajectory of your life. Now, that only happens when you stop allowing other people to define who you are and who you're capable of becoming, and you take the pen and you rewrite that definition of your ideal life. You grab that image of your limitless self and you hold on to it. And as you clearly see the path, you walk the path, no matter how far, no matter how long, no matter how high, until that future version of yourself becomes the ideal version of yourself you're living every single day. Remember, you have the power to change the definition and the trajectory of your life. So, how high and how far do you want to go? I'm Dr. John Terry, the Black Belt Leader. Thanks for joining me. Have a great day.